Welcome to Tripping Over the Ottoman. I'm David Van Deusen, here with my co-host, Abby.
And David and I are two super fans from two totally different generations who take a deep dive into episodes of the one thing that unites us.
And that is the Dick Van Dyke Show.
I just want to take a minute to thank everyone who has listened so far to our podcast. David and I are really enjoying this experience, and we're enjoying getting to know you in the comments and the emails that we've been receiving. And we're just really grateful for your listening and enjoying this with us. And we're just really happy to share this experience with you. So thank you so much. And today, to continue on with our podcast, we will be diving into the episode called Young Man with a Shoehorn.
I always think these titles are very interesting, Abby, because Carl Reiner, and I think in this case, the writers, Gary Marshall and Jerry Belson, I think like so many episode titles, this is a takeoff on another famous title.
They do this quite often. Yeah.
In the 1950s, there was a film, Young Man with a Horn. It was a musical drama that had Kirk Douglas and Lauren Bacall, Doris Day, Hoagie Carmichael. And Reiner has done this with many others. You know, we had One Angry Man instead of 12 Angry Men and various things. So Reiner was always very clever in terms of having these titles that sort of had significance, but they were just a bit off to attract the viewer's attention.
Yeah, very clever. Well, do you have a synopsis for this episode? I have a very short one.
Yeah, you go first. I have a couple.
Buddy and Rob run a shoe store they've invested in after chasing off its only full-time salesman.
Yeah, I have Rob and Buddy sign on as not so silent partners in a discount shoe store operation.
I like that one.
And then the final one I had was when he invests in a shoe store, Rob learns that a shoe clerk's lot is not always a happy one.
That's funny. That's a good one.
It's interesting over the years how these synopses have been evolving and developing, and people take their own shot at summarizing what the episode was all about.
This is the 22nd episode of season 4, which is the 116th episode of the entire series. And we did have the script for this episode that we got to take a look at, or one version of it. I believe it was Ronnie Jacobs' script version.
Yeah, very early draft of Ron's, yes.
Yeah, the date was, I think, November 13th, 1964, I believe was, and I didn't see any other revision dates. That was the written date that I saw. And then it looks like they filmed it in January of 1965. So several months later. So I'm sure there were many iterations in between those, but we were looking at this one. And then the show aired on February 24th, several weeks later in 1965.
And written by Gary Marshall and Jerry Belson, who had a long writing career together, and directed by Jerry Paris.
Absolutely. And this is Jerry still going strong, 4th season, directing. Yeah. Jerry Belson and Gary Marshall, I read something online. It said they shaped the landscape of the American sitcom and American comedy, which I thought that's pretty accurate depiction, I would say. I don't know if this is the first episode they've done together on the show. I didn't look at that. I should have looked at that. But basically, they were introduced to each other. They were both working as comedy writers separately, Gary and Jerry, and they were introduced by their mutual friend, Carl Reiner. He was looking for writers for the show, and then he hired them kind of as a duo, kind of thinking that their skills would sort of, work together well. And they went on to just create tons of content, tons of things, television, film. They created The Odd Couple, which a lot of people are very familiar with. And also Gary went on to produce a bunch of different things, Happy Days, Laverne and Shirley, More Committee, all the classics that we're all familiar with. And even directing films like Pretty Woman, Princess Diaries, things like that. Very, very well known. I met him once. They always say that Henry Winkler's the nicest guy in Hollywood. I would say that Gary Marshall's the second nicest guy in Hollywood. He was very kind to me for like the 15 minutes I talked to him.
In a recent visit with Gary's wife, Barbara Marshall, Barbara let me know that Gary's archives from his Hollywood career have gone to Northwestern University, where Gary attended and was an alum, as well as 3 of Gary's children.
That's really cool.
Fans get to Northwestern University, stop by and look up and see the treasures that are in those archives.
Take a look at the scripts and all kinds of stuff, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
So Gary wrote a memoir, maybe like 10, 15 years ago now. I can't remember the exact date, but it's called My Happy Days in Hollywood. And I do recommend it if anyone's interested in that period of Hollywood, or even Gary, just as is. It's so interesting. But he describes a little bit in it about him and Jerry Belson's very kind of chaotic working style. So he talks about how they're both complete opposites. So it's interesting that Carl thought they would work well together. He must have seen something in this dynamic, that was going to be interesting. But he describes Jerry Belson as having a quirky and chaotic personality, and that he was spontaneous and unpredictable in his work style. So he would basically, Gary Marshall was very practical in his approach, to writing comedy. Gary Belson was writing on napkins, writing on walls. He would introduce like these wild, absurd ideas into the scripts, like just suggesting that some character would just suddenly jump out a window or something, and Gary would have to kind of bring him down, to earth again, kind of thing. And he said he was erratic, that he would disappear for days. And Gary would be like, where did the guy go? Wondering where he went. And then he would return, but have all these fresh ideas and these like new stories. And so Gary was saying like it took him a while to get used to the style, but once he did, he really appreciated Belson's like, genius and his brilliance. He just learned how to work with his style more. So I just thought that was so fun.
This episode provides us with a lot of great situational things that you wish you could have been a fly on the wall, I think, as these eyes were being developed. In addition to our regular cast, there are a lot of great ancillary players in this episode. And I think, we'll maybe discuss them a little bit more as we talk about the plot of the episode and how they appear and what role they have in the episode, which are they're all unique and they're all entertaining for sure.
And we have the delight of this episode, like you said, taking place outside of the office or the home mostly. And so you get these wonderful, when you see this, like the episode when they go to the vet, or you get these scenes when it's a business or a place where there's lots of different, the public's coming in and out of it. It just provides these wonderful bits for these character actors, these bit actors to come in and shine for, 4 or 5 minutes. And it's really fun to do that. So when we see that it's happening in the shoe store, I think we get excited, like, oh, great, we're going to be some great customers coming in. We're already anticipating it,
Our episode opens in the office where Buddy is just very, very excited as he learns that he and the rest of the staff will be paid full price again for a sketch that they had previously written. It's remarkable because he's being awfully friendly with Mel.
You're a prince among men, Mel.
Which is uncharacteristic for the guys. Rob and Sally enter and observe what's going on, and Buddy explains that they're going to get paid again. And Buddy says, I knew the minute that I saw a guy with a head like a light bulb, it was to light up with something good, right?
And in the script originally, there was supposed to be a bit where Mel has like a hat and Buddy sort of like crumples it and uncrumples it, things like that. I thought that was interesting. Like, because I've used that in other things, but apparently didn't make the cut. And then there was also a bit about the money being $1,200 in the script, which they edited that out, which I'm glad, because I think that would have immediately dated it,
Yes.
Talking to a friend, and they were saying, if you want to figure out money in the 60s, times it, whatever it is what money in the 60s would now be, times it by 10. So if it would be like $12,000 now, kind of thing. So
the dynamic between Mel and Buddy, Buddy stands up on the desk and kisses his bald head, and Mel sort of doesn't know what to do with it. At one point, Mel says, I liked him better when he hated me, right? And away he goes.
Well, and then they all start discussing what they're going to do with this money.
Right.
We got Sally, of course, immediately goes to like mink coat, gonna treat myself.
I like Sally's bit though. She says, I'll buy one for my sister or my cousin.
Yeah. You haven't got a sister.
Rob says you haven't got one. No, I guess I'll have to buy it for me.
And then Rob says he's going to put it in the bank. Of course, being the, stable, pragmatic one, usually he's going to put in some savings. There was a joke in the script originally that said something like, Rob says something like, well, I'm supposed to save it for a rainy day. And Sally goes, well, that wouldn't work for me. I would take it out as soon as it gets partly cloudy, which I thought was a great joke.
Then Buddy says, I'm going to invest it in something that I always wanted, my Uncle Lou's shoe store, right?
I like Sally's, but what is with you in that shoe store?
Right.
Like, you can tell it gives life to these characters. Like Buddy's been talking about this before, many times and harping on it and all of his schemes, that he has.
He's doing everything he can to convince them. And he says, Uncle Lou sells shoes like I write jokes, to which Sally replies, he sells old shoes, right? So
Rob keeps, they start asking questions, how's the location? And Sally's joke, are there any single men working there that are tall with sideburns? and then of course the reversal where she goes, well, how is the location? And then Rob says something like, and are there any good single men looking there? And she goes, what do you mean? He goes, I'll take care of you, you take care of me.
Right.
Which I think is great. But they all agree to go down and take a look at the store together, essentially.
Right.
Over their lunch hour.
Off they go to Uncle Lou's shoe store, and they come in, and Buddy introduces them all to Uncle Lou, and they sort of take a look around the shoe store. And Sally particularly seems like pretty interested in the shoes or the merchandise. And Lou says, let me share with you my business statements, which he has uniquely tucked in the coat.
Well, and I will say here, this sets up the whole episode's, I think, key heart, which is that there is always in this show the dynamic between, quote unquote college boys, and more of like a working class person.
Right.
And we've seen that before. We see it in wholesale, no sale like wholesale, where Buddy is he's still he might be in show business now, but he comes from vaudeville. He comes from working hard for this kind of show business type career. He didn't come from having a degree or, knowing how to write well, etc. He comes from just experience and feet on the ground experience. And so it sets up that same thing again, where it's like Buddy's sort of more in line with that. Usually all of his uncle, his relatives, Blackie, they sell things, they're salesmen, they're, kind of bootstrap kind of people. And so you right here are getting that setup where they come into this place and we see Uncle Lou is just one of those guys again. He's just like crack salesman guy, business owner, but he's from the ground up. He knows what he's doing. And then we automatically just start weaving that web of like where it's going to clash later on, which I think it's going to be great.
Lou proceeds to say, here are my financial statements. And with that, Sally appears with a pair of shoes like on her hand and says, well, what do you think? And Buddy's like, well, I think they'd be better on your feet than on your hands. Or something
it's novel,
like that,
but you
right?
should wear gloves.
Yeah.
Well, and now also this sets up the plot that she's not going to invest. Sally's not going to invest. It's going to be Buddy and Rob, probably because we really just want to watch them in the shoe store by themselves because we know they're going to flounder a little bit. Whereas like I feel like if Sally were there, a woman may not typically be a salesperson in 1965. I don't know. Or she'd be too good at it. She knows shoes very well. She's very personable. So like we have to get the two in there. They're going to be fumbling for whatever reasons they're fumbling, So it kind of gets her out of that when she says, yeah, no, I'm not interested in investing, just in the shoes, just going to buy the shoes.
As they're in the back room discussing this, they hear the salesman from the sales room floor say, oh, let me take those back and I'll stretch them out on our automatic stretcher, shoe stretcher, right? Or whatever machine. And in comes Sid, the salesman, looking for the broom, which is tucked behind Rob. And he's like, excuse me, I need the broom. Turns out the broom is the automatic stretcher, right? Stick the broom up into the toe of the shoe. And
it's a great introduction to this character who is played by Milton Frome. I think it's Frome. I'm not sure. I do love how he calls all the characters Mrs. Shopping Bags or like, so he has all it's just so gruff. And he, of course, the stretching the broom, you get the very good introduction to him that he's sort of like, irritated most of the time. I always say like his character seems like he's always like 2 moments from a total meltdown, and we actually will see that later on in the episode that's true.
So let's talk about Milton for a second. He was in 2 appearances on the Van Dyke Show. Originally, he was in This Young Man with a Shoe Store, but he was also in Who Stole My Watch when Rob's birthday watch went disappearing.
And he plays Mr. Evans. Yeah, he's the guy that comes to investigate the insurance.
He also appeared with Dick in the 1963 film Bye Bye Birdie, which is sort of interesting.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
But his career, again, he shows up in any number of shows and you just recognize him. The Danny Thomas Show, Mr. Ed, My Favorite Martian, The Addams Family, My Mother the Car with Jerry Van Dyke.
Yes.
I Dream of Jeannie, Gomer Pyle, and so many more.
Millions, yeah. So much work.
His role in this show is so pivotal and it's so well done. Like you said,
it is
so natural.
Well, he's known for playing those kind of gruff, kind of a lot of times authority figures, kind of the supporting roles of sort of the gruff, kind of authority figure type situation. And he is so naturally good at that. Like you're saying, it's almost effortless,
Yeah. Lou eventually says to Buddy and Rob, after he's trying to convince them, it would be nice to have a couple of writers around to help with signs and ads. This, again, going back to this early draft, to which Buddy says, oh, let me think of some lines. So Buddy comes up with, our shoes are fit to be tied. Where elite feet meet, or our spats are nothing to spit at.
I like that one, the spats.
Lines that never made it to the final edit. We're not sure whether they were cut out ahead of time or what.
Great stuff, though.
Great stuff that could have been in the episode.
Yeah. Well, I love that we have it preserved somewhere, these drafts. It's very cool.
It is very interesting to see how these storylines evolve and what made it, what didn't. Absolutely.
Fascinating. Okay, Sally's out. Buddy and Rob, they say, yeah, I got to go We got to go talk it over with our wives, make sure it was this, but we think it looks pretty good. They looked at his expenses and all that. Seems like it's looking pretty good. Also, I love Sally's line. Where are the imported evening shoes? Right next to the sweat socks. That's class. So funny. She never misses a beat. So then there we go to the next scene, which goes to the Petrie home. Rob and Laura, they're at the dining table discussing this potential investment.
And Rob is doing everything that he can and for all that he's worth to convince Laura that this is what they should do. He said, this is what I've been waiting for, to invest in a shoe store all my life. She sort of looks at him.
It's just something we always wanted, a discount shoe store.
The discussion evolves to Rob's discussion of underwear money, which I thought is also hilarious. What do you mean underwear money? Well, I got money from my aunt when I was a kid, and I thought all the toys I could buy, but my mother made me buy underwear.
And she says, well, maybe you need an underwear. Well, the whole world needs underwear.
But he says, I don't want this to be underwear money.
Yes.
Right? We should mention that Rob also brought home a nice pair of shoes for Laura.
And Mary Tyler Moore is great at this, where she, is looking in disgust at something when Rob's got her back turned, whether it's like the Empress Carlotta necklace but in this case, it's these gaudy shoes with like this giant rose on them. And she has this great look of disgust and sort of, as soon as he turns his back, like, oh my God. And then when he turns back, kind of, throws on a smile really fast. She's so great at that.
At some point, Rob realizes that the shoes are no good. He said it's sort of similar to like the dress that I bought you in Mexico, the red dress. And Laura says, well, maybe now I have something to wear the shoes with.
Yeah.
Right? That red dress.
Right. It was the orange one with a bowl on it, right?
Something like that.
Now, I will say, I love, again, how Carl writes here, this super positive and super constructive conversation between this couple. There's no arguing. They even mentioned like, well, if someone saw us, they think we're arguing. We're not really arguing. We're just talking, and they just have such a constructive discussion that's so respectful, and they both listen to each other. And then she decides in the end, well, if there's something that's going to make you happy, Rob, like, let's just go ahead and do it, and I'm not going to stand in your way, kind of thing. It's very nice. Although we missed the best line, which was, well, what's more exciting than discount shoe store? Right, a lot of things. He kind of cuts himself off. Just so good. He's so good at that.
Laura decides that the shoes will go back to the shoe store the next day. She'll return them, and on we go to our next scene is Laura and Millie arriving at the discount shoe store, walking in and looking all around.
I would have liked Richie to have been in the scene, it would have been kind of fun for him, like running around and playing with. I think there could have been some opportunities for humor there, but I'm sure they just had no time,
I like the line that when they walk in, Millie says, I can smell the bargains. For some reason, that just doesn't that bring back a memory in your head, right? When you picture going into a shoe store, there definitely is a distinctive smell, or not, I don't want to say odor,
but a scent of like cheap materials and for sure. Now this is a great Millie scene, because as we know, as we've seen in the past, Millie loves to be associated with anything that might be considered kind of clout. So celebrity. We saw this in the fur coat one when she goes with Laura to the, I'm her Aunt Maria, she's really into like the story. She loves getting into like the drama of it, and then the anniversary party where she's obsessed with Alan coming to the party, and odd but true, like, oh, you're gonna name her in the paper, kind of thing. And she loves this idea. So now we see when she comes in, like, oh man, this is gonna be a time for Millie to shine, and of course she does.
Well, she wants to know how much discount is she going to get. She's she's the friend, and she's the friend that sometimes babysits, right? So she should get more of a discount. And the fact that this is so exciting because her husband Jerry only buys mutual funds.
Yep.
Boring mutual funds.
Slice of life. They can hear the cash register, all that kind of thing.
Yeah, you can hear the money being made. Oh, you just made money. Did you hear that?
Yeah. And then we get introduced to Sid again. We see the crack salesman, Sid, is it Foreman? I can't remember his name. He's there, and he's not waiting on them. He's ignoring them. Laura asks a few different ways. Hey, can you come help me? Kind of thing. And, I'll be with you in a minute, kind of thing. And Millie's getting more into this drama of like, oh my God, the shoe store is amazing. Laura's getting more and more annoyed that, she's being ignored by the salesman there.
Sid is genuinely rude to her, right? Ask, what about the shoes? Well, I want to return them. Well, why? Well, I don't like them.
Well, and this sets up that same dynamic again, continues that same dynamic, which is that the sort of like Laura probably used to going to shoe stores for kind of a higher class of people that are probably catering to her, bowing down to her every, want and helping her and, really good service. really expensive shoes, I'm sure. So she's got a different probably mentality of like what's expected in these places. And that sets up that again, which I think also, continues that.
Millie says, tell him who we are. And Laura's like, no, I'm not going to tell him who I am. And at some point, Sid says, he wishes he had 1,000 customers like Laura. And they sort of look at him, but he says, but I got 2,000, right? At which point,
so good.
Laura and Millie are just done. And away they go.
And we can say he is so good at this. He just is slowly unraveling over like a 3 or 4 minute period where he's just like, oh, you go take the purple. It goes with everything. He's just sort of like devolving. He's getting more and more annoyed at her. Yeah, to the point where they walk out. Yeah, they walk out.
Yes.
We can sense she's going home to tell Rob about it, what had happened, at the store.
What I find intriguing is Sid's character. If you just watch him in the scene, he is like a real shoe salesman.
Yeah.
He's picking up the boxes and putting the lids on and maybe putting shoes in the box. Or
amazing acting. Yeah.
He is really remarkable.
So natural. Yeah. You would think he was really a salesman for sure.
Go back and watch that. See what you think.
All the time delivering all this dialogue as he's doing all this, it's unbelievable. Then we go home back to Rob and Laura. Now they're not discussing the investment. Now they're discussing this incident with Sid that had happened. And Laura's trying to convince Rob that Sid is, he's a toxic salesman. He's driving customers away. He was super rude to her and kind of always wanting to, I think you see this dynamic in relationships a lot where there's a passive one. Rob's a little more passive and Laura's sort of like, can you do something about this? You got to do something about this. So you have that kind of going on. Rob's cracking nuts during all of this, which I think is such a funny little piece of business. How do they decide on these things?
It's the secondary thing that's occurring while this other discussion is going on.
Yeah.
And you're right. He's just cracking away, never really saying much until the point where Laura comes and starts to eat his nuts. And he's like, what are you doing? Well, you're eating my nuts. I cracked all these, right?
Oh, I'm only having a couple.
Yeah. He says, I crack them. I like to eat them all.
I like to eat them all at once.
Something relatable, I think, again, for married couples, that it's these sorts of things that go on in relationships.
It makes it so real,
Yes. And in spite of the fact that this other conversation about Sid being rude and Rob doesn't want to be involved because he's a silent investor and all that stuff.
Yeah. Right? Rob says it's not his place to butt in. Yeah. And then finally, Laura kind of convinces him like, well, if you got a bad salesman on the floor, it's just silly because you're investing in this and, he's losing you money kind of thing. And so Rob finally agrees, but only if Buddy goes with him. And she says, well, and he goes, well, they say something about how he can return the shoes too that he got Laura. So
we go back to the shoe store scene. Interestingly, in the draft script, Sid was waiting on a woman that had a hat with fruit all over it. And as you mentioned earlier, he refers to the various customers. Now,
is this the one with the little girl too, as well? Isn't there like a child and a mother?
There was a woman, yes, and a little girl. Again, the scene never made it to the final cut. But at one point, Sid gets a little frustrated with her, apparently, and he says, hey, Mrs. Fruit on the hat.
I love how he does that. Mrs. Shopping Bags.
Sid Milton delivers it with great vigor in this early draft. We don't get to see it, but having seen him play other parts, I can totally envision that in my mind. Oh,
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. He would have done a great job. So then they comes in and he's equally, so Lou's out to lunch. He sees, oh, you're the two partners. So Lou's out to lunch and, Sid's left running the store. And he's equally dismissive to, Rob and Buddy, as though, even though he knows they're partners, he's just as equally kind of rude, kind of dismissive to them as he was to Laura and Millie the other day. Throughout this, it's sort of a Rob Buddy thing where Rob's saying, I don't feel right about this. I don't want to confront him. And Buddy's saying, but it's our duty. He's got to know there's a bad salesman. And so this is sort of back and forth. Finally, Rob sort of, flags him over like, hey, you got to help me kind of thing, just like Laura did. And he says, oh, I remember those shoes. He's like, I want to return these shoes for my wife. I remember those shoes. Is that your wife? And he says, yeah, not bad. Not bad. It's like that. And then, they sort of have a back and forth, Sid and Rob.
Eventually, Sid's had enough and said, oh, sort of like, if you guys know better, fine, I'm out. And boom, away he goes and just blows out the door.
He even says, you guys have been in the business so they tell him, you're being rude. You're being rude to my wife. You're rude to these customers. We can't have this. And he says, well, I don't take orders from any college boys. And I think in this original script, it said 3-day wonders, which I thought was interesting. But he says, I've been in the business for 20 some years. You've been in it 3 days. You're telling me how to sell shoes, so I'm out of here. I don't take orders from any college boys, which I think is an interesting line. And then, he quits. And the best part was he leaves with a zinger. And I saw the Alan Brady show the other night. And you know what? It stunk. The way he delivers it. And then, leaves. He's quitting. He's his resignation. He hands in his shoehorn. He's out the door. There was a line in the original script that said, Buddy said, I should have called him Grumplestiltskin, which I thought was hilarious. Like, that's a great line.
But basically leaves Buddy and Rob standing there like, flabbergasted or perplexed, like, now they've done it. Now what are they going to do?
And this is the crux of the show now, is Rob and Buddy alone in this next scene in the shoe store trying to make some sales because their money's floating out the door as they speak because Sid's gone and Lou's not back yet. So they're just out to dry. So
as quickly as Sid leaves, in comes a man who says, I need a pair of Oxfords with rubber heels. And Buddy and Rob look at each other and, he says, well, what are we going to do? But Buddy says, well, you got to wait on him. Rob says, I don't know how to do it. And Buddy says, I don't either. He said, well, you worked there, years ago. He says, I was a stock boy or something like that. He says, Rob, you can do it, right? It's you bought shoes before, right? It's just like buying shoes, but you're sitting on the other side or something to that.
You only
effect,
face
right?
the other way and sit lower or something.
Yeah.
So Rob concedes. And then I would say these next characters that come through the door and all these interactions Rob has where he's sort of the one being the salesman, of course, there's all these flat stage directions or screen directions, stage directions where, Rob does this, he does this. And the way that he can take those directions and just make them so funny. I mean, just it's unbelievable when you read the sort of like dry, line they've given him of what to do and just what he's done with it. So we already start here with this guy. He says, I think you better measure my foot. And Rob's going like, I don't know how to, and he gets a little metal device, puts the guy's foot in. He has no idea how to read it. He's just kind of doing. And the best part is when he measures the guy's foot and he picks up the silver thing to look at it. And the way he just sort of rotates it around in his hand, like he doesn't even know what way it's supposed to go to read it. It's just great. Every little beat like that.
And he starts with the guy's shoe on, and the guy says, shouldn't you take my shoe off? And you're right. He puts it on. You hear the guy say, like he closed it too tight, the metal sides too tightly clamped on his foot or whatever. But all in all, what's great is the guy sits there reading the newspaper, which affords Dick as Rob to go through these gyrations of trying to figure out how to read the device. Eventually, resorting to the fact that he takes his thumbs and his hands and his pinkies and tries to measure the length of his foot.
It's so good.
Buddy's, organizing shoes on the shelf, and Rob goes over and says to Buddy, Buddy, what does this look like? As if to say, what size do you think this is? And Buddy says, that looks like a butterfly. And he goes and takes his hands and he says, and this is a rabbit, right?
The great edgy. Also, Buddy, no help in these situations, only cracking jokes, like totally useless, it's just like off on the side. So now same scene, the sort of a fade out, happens and we get the time has passed now. Well,
they do manage to apparently sell the guy a pair of shoes and they're delighted with themselves that they made the sale.
He's headed out the door. They're excited. They made a sale. And they're still waiting for Lou to come back. And I think they think like, okay, there's just one guy. We dodged that bullet. Lou's going to come back right now, right? Nope. No one comes back. Sid doesn't come back. And the second customer who comes in, is it Jane Dulo first? Yeah, she's a first one. Jane Dulo, who unfortunately the original script titles her character as a fat lady, which yikes. Also not overweight by any means as a woman. I mean, lovely lady. So she's the second customer. And Rob's going like, who's going to wait on her? Okay, I guess I'll wait on her.
Jane was in 4 Dick Van Dyke Show episodes. She was in the classic scene in Never Name a Duck where she sort of had a staring match with the duck in the veterinarian's office. Was also in The Death of the Party. Mm-hmm. In this episode, Young Man with a Shoehorn. And as you mentioned earlier,
she's Opal Levenger.
Jane's credits are innumerable. Leave It to Beaver, Andy Griffith, That Girl, I Dream of Jeannie, Gomer Pyle, Get Smart, My Three Sons, All in the Family, Golden Girls in later years.
Yeah.
Jane and Richard Deacon were very good friends. I have numerous photographs in my collection of Richard and Jane together out at functions and enjoying each other's company.
She just had a wonderful voice too, very recognizable. Like even if you don't know it's her, you hear her, it's her. It's got a slightly raspy kind of brashness, and it's just no nonsense kind of feeling to it, and it's just hilarious and so recognizable.
And an amazing character actress. for the roles that she played. In particular, now let's talk about her role here, which is also hysterical.
So good.
Jane comes in as her character and says she's looking for open-toed pumps. And Buddy and Rob look at each other like, well, where are they? I don't know. And Buddy goes over and he says, oh, here they are. And he opens the box. And Rob looks at the shoe and there's no hole. And he says, Buddy, there's no hole here. And Buddy's like, well, maybe they healed up.
Just useless.
This banter is only facilitated by the situations that they've created here and the interplay between Rob and Buddy, which again, Jerry and Gary's writing is really superb.
Spot on. So the deal with this just Jane Doolittle character is that he's trying on shoes on her feet and they seem to be getting smaller and smaller. She's not satisfied unless she's got the smallest size. And so he keeps, I would like him a half a size smaller. You know, they go back and forth. And then the best part, I think, is at some point this is like the last shoe. It's very, very small. He's got it shoving it on her foot and he's going to take off the shoe to try on another one. And he pulls on it and she puts her leg up on his knee and just like, you know, boost herself back off of his knee. I mean, it's just a riot. I mean, I was dying at that.
At that point, she says, I'd like a half a size smaller or whatever. So Rob looks at her in like disbelief, smaller. Sure enough, he does what he can to get the shoe on. But to get it on, right, he's really pressing the back heel and his finger gets stuck in the back of the heel. And now,
young man, what are you doing?
She gets up and starts to walk around. In the original script, Rob had the line, hey, they look good on us.
Yeah, which is a great line.
After she walks around a little bit, Rob manages to pull his finger out. Then Jane Doolittle looks at him and she says, now they don't fit.
She's so good. So good. Just so concise. That's it. Just perfect writing, perfect acting. So then we got a third customer who comes in. That's less of which we can tell this is where Buddy fits in. He jokes with the customers. This is his role. You know, he's going to provide some humor, lighten the mood to maybe like their not so great sales, ideas. And so there's a woman that comes in. This is Amzie Strickland, who, if you are sure you haven't seen her in something, you are wrong because she is in everything. You have definitely seen her in something. I think I read she has over 650, if you include radio, stage, film, and radio and TV altogether, over 650 roles.
7 appearances on the Dick Van Dyke Show. And we know they were classic appearances, great roles in every one. She was in That's My Boy as the nurse.
Yep.
She was in The Master Beast vying to purchase The Thing against Laura. Who Would Where was Antonio Stradivarius. The Return of Edwin Karp, she was the mother. In The Case of the Pillow, she was Mr. Wiley's wife. And we already mentioned her, I think, when we did our discussion on The Great Petri Fortune as one of the heirs of Uncle Hezekiah.
This is a fun aside. So I must have continued to work with Gary Marshall outside of this show. There's a scene in Pretty Woman, Gary's film Pretty Woman, where she's at the opera. Julie Roberts' character's at the opera with Richard Gere, and after the opera is over, she plays an older woman who's sitting next to them in the next box seat and says, "How did you enjoy the opera, my dear?" And Julie Roberts gets a line, "Oh, it was so good, I almost peed my pants." And you get her reaction like, "What?" She's a stuffy old lady. But so if you think you haven't seen her, you've seen her. She's in something like that. You've seen.
Back in the day, Amzie was on Bonanza, My Favorite Marsh, and Patty Duke. But then her career spanned many years later, and she was on Gary Shandling's show and Alf, Matlock, Mad About You,
It's a massive portfolio of stuff. Absolutely.
One of my favorite roles of hers was actually in a Disney film where they did a story about the Twilight Zone Tower of Terror, and she sort of played a witch character in that.
I'll have to look that up. That sounds interesting.
With Steve Guttenberg, yes.
Cool.
And you see her and you immediately say, I know that actress, and then it clicks and you think, oh my gosh, this is Amzie Strickland.
Yeah, just prolific. She comes in this one. She has less of a role in this one in terms of like she doesn't have many lines really. She's just laughing hysterically. So Buddy's joking with her that Rob's wrapping up her shoe box with strings so she can take it with her, and Buddy's telling these jokes. I forget what it was. I think it was something like, "Show me the loafers" or something. He goes, "Oh, I'll introduce you to my brother-in-law." Something, one of those old timey great jokes. She's laughing hysterically, goes out the door, and we see, after Buddy and Rob sort of banter for a minute, that the string is still attached to the box and it's quickly unraveling off the spool. So she's out the door. She's walking farther and farther away from the shoe store.
Buddy and Rob, as you said, are having back and forth, and actually it's covered up in the dialogue, but if you go back and listen carefully, you can hear Rob tell Buddy that in the course of their afternoon, he managed to sell the pair of shoes that Laura returned.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Mm-hmm.
It's pretty masked in the dialogue, but again, if you listen closely, you'll hear it. They discover the spinning
String.
tower of string, and they said, "Oh my gosh!" Right? And they start to reel her back in,
like
if
tug
you
of
will,
war, yeah,
yeah, like almost like a fishing line,
Yeah.
right? And back the door opens, and in she comes, still
laughing hysteric with the box in hand, still attached. So funny. So just even that, she just makes it great. She's got a 2-minute thing there, and she makes it the most.
Did she have a line?
I was looking. I don't think that she did. I think it was just laughing.
I think it was laughing.
Yeah, I'm almost positive.
I wonder if she get paid as a talking actor for that role because she laughed.
I would think so. Her laugh is fantastic too. So now we come to our fourth customer, which is everyone's favorite bit of the whole show. And
I agree.
It's because we get to see Rob in his best element, which is being nervous and flustered. And he does not disappoint. It is so good. It's just the very best part of the episode, I think. It starts out funny in that a voluptuous woman, great figure woman, is coming into the shoe store, needs help getting shoes.
She's described as sexy in this script, right? And I would say well endowed.
Yes, well endowed and just striking. And she's in there, and the best part, I think, just sets the whole scene off, is that Rob and Buddy are in the corner, sort of like, together, like, what are we going to do about this? And they're both silently like, no, you do it. No, you do it. No, you have to do it. And they're going sort of back and forth, but there's no dialogue. It's just them like silently like pushing each other back and forth. Who's going to have to help her? It's so funny.
What's so great about this episode is there's sort of these series of what ends up being 4 vignettes, if you will, right?
Yeah.
We started out with the man coming in with the shoes, and it afforded Dick to do his comedy, right?
Mm-hmm,
Then we had Jane Dula with the finger getting caught in the shoe, and again, a situation that afforded just an opportunity for Dick to show us his stuff, and then sort of the fun relief of the MC Strickland thing,
with Buddy making his jokes, and
now this final scene where again is sort of the best one, I think.
Well, and it's for that reason, because we're anticipating it. This is the good comedy, is where the character so well that you go, when that woman walks in that shoe store, I know exactly how Rob is going to act here. And you are anticipating it, and you cannot wait. And I think that's key. You're so excited to see what's going to happen.
The first shtick is he finally just takes some shoes over to wait on her.
And by the way, the audience is already laughing hysterically at this point.
Yes.
Just looking at the woman and seeing Rob in the corner, anticipating that. The laughter is so loud in this scene, so loud.
So Rob goes over with a couple boxes of shoes and goes to sit down on the stool, which is faced in the wrong direction. And as he sits on it, he slides down off the wrong side, which gives us some comedic relief. And then turns around and begins to try to wait on her, but just doesn't really know where to look or where not to look.
Well, and then let's not forget when he first comes over with the boxes and he says, "Do you want me to try on some of these?" And he's staring at her legs, from like an inch away, absolutely wide-eyed.
Finally gets the stool turned around
and slides down the other way, slides down the front. Yeah.
And then says, "Do you want me to try these on your legs?"
Oh, yeah. Or your feet. Yeah. And he's wiping his sweaty palms off. He's loosening his tie. I mean, he's just a wreck.
He's so inside out, like we said, he can't look at her. So what does he do? He's so uncomfortable that he sort of turns his head and almost like looks at the ceiling.
As he's putting the shoe on her, yeah.
As the customer is getting the shoe put on, she sees him looking up. And so she sort of turns and she starts looking up. Of course, the audience is like, what's going on, right? Well, that Buddy comes over and sees them looking up and says, "What are you looking at?" And Rob's like, "Oh, no, nothing." And he said, "Well, next time you see it, let me know," or whatever. But the expressions on the face and the way they're all doing it.
Rob's sort of coughing nervously now. How does that feel? He's finally got the shoe on her. How's it feel? And she says, "Well, not too good. You have my right shoe on my left foot," or something like that. And then the best line, I think, of the whole episode, which is, "You have to excuse me. It's my first day in the leg store."
Only to be followed by, "Lady, I can't wait on you. I'm a married man."
Now, before you were talking about something that was heard over that you couldn't hear quite the dialogue over someone's laughing. Same thing here. The audience is laughing so loud at the leg store line that he actually has a second line, which if you tune in really closely, you can hear. he goes, "Oh, I'm sorry. I mean, my first leg at the day store." Like he says, he kind of reverses it, which also funny, you know. But by that, the audience is just lost in the laughter. It's so funny.
That young lady was played by LaRue Farlow.
Hasn't done too much. It didn't look like.
This was her only Dick Van Dyke Show appearance.
Mm-hmm.
She was later in the film that Maury produced called "Don't Worry,
yeah.
We'll Think of a Title."
Yes, that's
which had
right.
Rosemary and Deacon and Carl.
Strange
and
movie if you want a fun, weird spin-off of the Dick Van Dyke Show.
It appears as though that she had a different stage name later in her career called LaRue Stanley.
Interesting.
In later years appeared in shows like Married with Children. She was on a Columbo movie or episode, and he was even on Law and Order. And I believe LaRue is still with us here in 2024 as we make this episode.
We'll have to get in touch with her. So Rob doesn't disappoint. This again, these are all these vignettes where Rob just gets to shine. This one in particular, it's just again, the stage directions are so minimal. I think there was something about him maybe sliding down the stool. You know, says something like Rob without looking grabs a fitting stool, but it's turned around backwards, and when he sits on it, he slides down backwards and gets up again. Like it's, you know, just to take that and make it what it was, you know, and to make and that was really the only direction. He does 10 other different things that weren't even in there, you know, that he probably just came up with on his own.
The scene finally ends with this young lady, and Rob and Buddy are discussing, you know, the challenges that they've had that day and the successes that they've had. And Buddy talks about that he sold ox blood shoe polish or something. And with that, he turns around and yells into the background, "Irving, kill another ox." Interestingly, in this script, it was Charlie, not Irving.
I feel like Maury has like a file in his head of funny names, you know, Irving probably being one of them. They use Irving in the show quite a few other times. You must just think it's a hilarious name, you know?
Yeah.
A woman is walking out, and you get the sense that they didn't sell her anything. He says something like, "Well, I guess she didn't buy anything, you know. Oh, we can't win them all. We did pretty good today." They're both in you know, agreement that they've done pretty good considering, you know, the situation. And then Uncle Lou re-enters the store. This is where it all comes to a head, the working class versus college boy debate. And Lou is he's gonna school them in the next few moments about this particular topic. He's gonna school them into like, you don't understand how this business works, and we do. And I think that's really, really interesting that this is always seen a lot. And I feel like maybe Carl walked that line too, of sort of being a college boy, but also having a lot of respect for people that didn't have degrees and things like that, who were just working great comedian things. I feel like you can sense that sometimes in Carl's biography too, a little bit.
We'd be remiss if we didn't mention, you know, Uncle Lou was played by Lou Jacoby,
Oh, yeah,
who was
that's right.
also a well-known actor.
Yeah, great actor.
Shows up Alfred Hitchcock, That Girl, Make Room for Granddaddy with Danny Thomas, Love American Style, Barney Miller. Also in Everything You Wanted to Know About Sex, but Were Afraid to Ask.
Often plays like an immigrant background, Jewish, you know, something like that. And really gruff characters too.
Yes.
I think, again, that like immigrant background fits in here with this kind of, you know, class debate we have going on, you know, dynamic.
And a very believable character,
yes.
too. Just like Milton's character of Sid.
Yes.
Both of these characters, I think, are so believable.
Lou says he ran into Sid and he knows what happens. He ran into him at the delicatessen. He told him he quit. And then this is where he starts his sort of thing. He says, okay. And by the way, Rob's really smart, but he does not catch on to this until he's halfway through this, you know, kind of lecture. They say something like, "We did pretty good, Lou. Rob rang him up, or Rob sold him. I rang him up. We did pretty good." And he goes, "Oh, okay, great. Well, then I'll see you guys here tomorrow morning. And you my 2-star salesman kind of thing." And they say, "What do you mean? We have to work." And so he kind of describes to them, "Hey, you know, you guys have glamorous jobs. You have a lot of opportunities. To do this on a lark on one day is one thing, but to do it every single day for your whole life is another. And kind of like you guys don't have that skill, you know?" And he goes, "I need Sid on my staff because he will do that day in and day out. And he's good at it day in and day out. And he knows, and we know, me and Sid know how this business ticks. And that's what you're investing in, is his knowledge of that and Sid's skill in at doing what he does best. And great if you have a college degree or whatever, but it doesn't matter, because in the end, we know what we're doing here, just like you know what you're doing at the Alan Brady Show." It's a very interesting working class versus, you know, more of a white collar situation. I just think it's really, Carl really touches on those things with such respect and like grace, I feel like, all of the time.
In the draft, Lou compares Sid to comedian Alan King.
Well, he has a whole bit where he's describing, he actually, again, very smart, this guy, the way he's analyzing this situation and able to like deliver this concept. He says, There's another thing that's similar in show business and the shoe business. And salesmen have a style just like comedians do. So then he goes through all these different comedians. Milton Berle, he's a fast talker who comes out and is all over the place. We have salesmen like that. They work very hard. They do good. Some salesmen remind me of your boss, Alan Brady. They clown around always, laugh at their own jokes. They do okay too. And Sid happens to be, like you were saying, Alan King. And comedian who complains about everything. Nothing's ever right. No matter how bad you got it, he's got it worse. And let's face it, this isn't such a fancy neighborhood. People here have a few things to complain about, which I thought was a really beautiful line. They're on that wavelength. Alan King is very big in this neighborhood, and so is Sid. I do think the revised script does get this across, but I just thought that was so well written, even as a first edition of this. It's just really, really beautiful.
The sentiment is delivered. They could have left that in, but I think the dialogue that ended up being there still drove the point home very well. Rob apologizes to Sid about having Sid quitting.
Well, and they tell him too, but that, by the way, that Sid is very good at this. He might be rude, but he said that he sells almost 80% of the customers, he sells to. And so they're kind of blown away by this of like, wow, that's really how this works here. They had no idea,
Doing Lou says, oh, Sid quits every week. He'll be back.
He quits 3 times a week, which, by the way, confirms the thoughts on he's always a minute away from exploding, which is, he definitely is.
The door opens and Sid returns to discover Rob and Buddy's still there. And he says he's not returning until they're gone. And they said, we're going. Right. Sid says, then I'm back.
So then we get the final scene, which is a little different from the script. So they're all in the shoe store together. Lou and Sid, Buddy, Rob, Sally, Laura, Millie. They're all in the shoe store together. In the final scene, the women are trying on buying shoes. And in the script, Sid is actually waiting on them. But here he's sort of standing off with, Lou kind of commenting on the situation, and Buddy's actually trying the shoes on. So I don't know what difference that made. We still get somehow that they've all made amends though. Like Sid's there in the room with them. They're all talking, kind of bantering back and forth. So we get that there's been some sort of resolution for their relationships.
Let's talk about the cut scene though, because that, as we talked about, this original scene is entirely different than what was filmed for the final episode. So in the final scene, Sid is waiting on Sally and says to Sally, look, you've tried on every shoe in the house. You want to start trying on boxes now? And Sally says, no, but I'd like to see something in an alligator bag. Your head. And Sid says, well, you just blew your discount. And Sally says, may all your shoelaces be knotted. And Sid says, what am I wasting my time for? Put these on.
That would have been so great, And Milton would have done it amazing. And by the way, because I think Rosemary is on the same caliber of effortlessness when it comes to comedy, where you don't feel like she's so natural, so it would have been really funny to see the two of them banter, which I never get to in the whole episode, unfortunately. But
the exchange, would have been very natural for the two of them. But instead, our final scene opens with Laura and Millie and Sally sitting in the chairs with Buddy waiting on them. And I like the fact that Sally's trying to decide what to get, and Buddy tells Sally that the shoes she has on make her feet look 10 years younger. So she says, I'll take 2 pairs then.
Which is great. Well, and then Millie can't decide on, she's like, I can't decide on the black evening shoes or the sneakers, Like Maury says something, oh, you going to a formal tennis game? Exactly.
At which point Rob is not present, but we hear Laura say, Rob, where are you with my shoes? And Rob comes through the back curtain from the back room with the broom and a pair of shoes. And Rob looks at Laura and says, Laura, I told you, you're either a size 6.5 or a 6 with a broom.
So good. Well, and then also Lou says to Millie, take them both, take the shoes both. You see that everyone's friends again, by the end. And it's just, I think what was the line? The end, the scripted version of the end, very, very end, the very end line, instead of the broom 6.5 thing, it's not really even, I don't really quite get it. Sally says, I came in to bring back 3 pairs and I bought 5. And Rob says to Sally, you bought all 5 pair from Sid. And Buddy says, it just goes to show you. And Rob says, what? And Buddy says, I don't know. Haven't you been paying attention? That's which I thought kind of funny, but I think the broom part was really clever to bring that back in at the end.
Yes.
It worked much better than that, I think.
It's fun to see Rob like twisting that shoe on the broom, the automatic shoe stretcher.
I mean, this was so fun as an episode because it's, again, a show outside of the home, outside of the office, which is such a treat when that happens because you get that wonderful showcase of all these bit players coming and going from the establishment. And that's where all the comedy comes from, and Rob's reaction to these various characters. And our anticipation that we know seeing the characters, each one of them, how he's going to interact with them. And we can't wait to see it. It's really, really smart writing, I think, by Gary and Jerry.
It's the brilliance of the writing to present situations which allow Dick to just excel.
Yeah, absolutely. And on top of that, they don't ever insult our intelligence. You know, the right. I think that's Carl. Everyone who wrote on the show, I think that's probably why Carl picked these two. That they're not writing down to you ever. I mean, the whole series was really like that, which is cool. A great sense of that like working class college boy dynamic too, which I find really fascinating. It's amazing the topics that Carl can cover in a 25-minute sitcom that are so meaningful. I just find that really, really cool.
So we hope you have enjoyed today's look at Young Man with a Shoehorn.
And if you haven't listened to the rest of our episodes, feel free. They're available on all the major streaming platforms and, of course, here on YouTube. And we hope you enjoy them. Thanks for being part of this community that we've started here. We're really enjoying it, and we hope you are too.
And we value your comments, your questions, your contributions to the discussion. So leave some feedback on the channel, or feel free to send us an email at trippingovertheottoman@gmail.com. We always love to see the subject pop in, box 7030. We always know we have another fan sending us a cool comment. So thank you for that. Until next time, I am David.
And I'm Abby. And thanks for tripping over the Ottoman with us. We'll see you next time.